2017 was not one of my better years. My father's contract with Comcast had ended, and he was out of work for a while after that. Things were tougher for us. We had to get cheaper and less food, and my father was forced to do a lot of penny pinching and cut certain things out of the budget. In the 2 or so years prior, my family was able to enjoy more prosperity, and this sudden radical shift brought me down. Friction in the family also became greater, as my mother was having a hard time finding a house after our big move to Georgia, and was forced to live with my father for some time. It was the first time she and my father had to live in the same house after divorcing and separating years before. It was a stressful time for everyone. However, I was still able to get through it, and it was partially thanks to NickRewind. NickRewind formally introduced me to the world of 90s Nickelodeon. I wasn't a complete stranger to 90s Nick, as I had watched a few of the shows when I was younger, but it wasn't until I watched NickRewind that I got my first real taste of it. I saw many shows like Rocko's Modern Life, Doug, Real Monsters, Cat Dog, The Angry Beavers, All That, Kenan and Kel, and Kablam for the first time on NickRewind. And I got even more exposure to shows I only barely remembered watching when I was younger, like Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, and Hey Arnold. I found that I really enjoyed watching these shows, and I would often spend hours watching NickRewind recordings on the DVR, or would watch NickRewind live during late nights. These shows provided me with happiness when many of the things that had provided happiness before were receding into the past, as we couldn't afford them anymore, or I was simply growing out of them or getting bored with them. Overall, 2017 was mediocre at best for me, but it did still have its highlights, and NickRewind was one of them. Then, this year, on January 31st, exactly 2 weeks ago as I write this script, NickRewind, the programming block formerly known as NickRewind, was taken off the air, and a few days later Nickelodeon announced that NickRewind had been discontinued. When I first heard of this news, I couldn't help but feel somewhat sad. That block had taken me through one of the most troubling periods of my life, and now it was gone for good. So, what happened? What was the downfall of this awesome block? In this video, we'll find that out. I briefly mentioned NickRewind in my Teen Nick video, which I'll put a link in the description for in case you're interested in watching it. But this video will give this block the focus it deserves. So, let's begin. Since 2010, even before the launch of the block that would eventually become NickRewind, Nicktoons had been airing 90s Nicktoons in the wee hours of the morning. But by 2011, interest on social media in 90s Nickelodeon shows had grown to such a degree that Nickelodeon decided to launch an even bigger, more official block on Teen Nick. That block was The 90s Are All That, launched on July 25th, 2011. At first, the block only aired 3 shows, Doug, Kenan and Kel, and Clarissa Explains It All. But as time went on, more shows were added, such as the ones I mentioned earlier. Some, such as The Angry Beavers, Real Monsters, and Salute Your Shorts, were aired in special blocks and did not appear regularly for various reasons. Many of these blocks also featured interstitials and bumpers that weren't featured regularly on The 90s Are All That either. There were also many fun special events on The 90s Are All That over the years. So many that if I mentioned every single one, this video would be far too long. During the final week of 2011, there was an event called Party Like It's the 90s, featuring many shows that originally aired on SNCC in the late 90s. To coincide with the 2013 Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards, The 90s Are All That had 90s Your Choice Awards 2013, in which viewers would vote for certain 90s Nickelodeon shows and the winning shows would be aired every midnight. This is something that would be done again during the 2014 Kids' Choice Awards. The 90s Are All That also celebrated the 20th anniversaries of The Adventures of Pete and Pete and Hey Dude, and aired many episodes of Rugrats about Chucky Finster in memory of Christine Cavanaugh, who originally voiced Chucky in Rugrats and who died in 2015. On September 11th,
Since September 11th, I noticed that a lot of people have been afraid of all Muslims, but I don't think that's fair.
No, not that September 11th. On September 11th, 2015, it was announced that a new, similar block would be replacing The 90s Are All That later that year. And so, on October 5th, the SPLAT was launched. It ran for 8 hours on late nights, and aired much of the same programming that the previous block aired. It also gave more focus to shows from the 80s and early 2000s, and added many shows to the regular schedule that previously only aired during special blocks or events. Speaking of events, the SPLAT also had its fair share of them, such as when it rickrolled its viewers during an episode of Cat Dog on April Fool's Day 2016. In November of that year, the SPLAT broadcasted a Double Dare reunion to celebrate the show's 30th anniversary. On May 1st, 2017, the SPLAT was renamed NickSplat to coincide with Nickelodeon's cross-platform branding, but after the name change, the block still remained largely the same. In November, NickSplat aired every episode of Hey Arnold leading up to the premiere of Hey Arnold the Jungle Movie on the 23rd of November. On March 15th, 2019, the YouTube channel for NickSplat was renamed NickRewind, and NickSplat's other social media and block followed 3 days later. With this came an even larger focus on 80s and 2000s Nickelodeon shows, with the 80s, 90s, and 2000s getting equal amounts of focus, thus leading to bumpers like this that warm the heart of a Gen Z like myself.
This is 80s kids.
This is 90s kids.
This is 2000s kids.
They're talking to me. Anyway, the schedule for NickRewind got shifted around a lot during its run. It was reduced to only 2 hours on July 15th, 2019, as Teen Nick introduced content from Awesomeness TV and MTV to its schedule. A few days later, due to backlash from NickRewind viewers, the block was re-lengthened to 5 hours, and by mid-August of that year, it was back to its original time slot. Then, in March 2021, it was reduced again to 6 hours before being re-lengthened again to 7 hours 4 months later. In late February 2021, NickRewind hosted the Paramount Plus Pre-Party, a promotion for the soon-to-launch Paramount Plus streaming network that introduced many shows to the block, like Chalk Zone and The Wild Thornberrys. On January 31st, 2022, NickRewind was removed from Teen Nick, and the official discontinuation of the block was announced a few days later. The reason NickRewind was discontinued is because Paramount is slowly but surely moving away from television and towards streaming with Paramount Plus and Pluto TV, the latter of which still airs many of the shows that NickRewind aired regularly. So, although the original block is now gone, the shows still live on digitally. However, NickRewind and its predecessors will be gravely missed, not only by 90s kids and other fans of 90s Nickelodeon, but also by people like myself, whom NickSplat kept going during a difficult point in my life. So, thank you, NickRewind, NickSplat, the Splat, and the 90s Are All That, for being there for all of us, be it for a nostalgia trip, general appreciation of 90s Nickelodeon shows, or a retreat from the stress of our everyday lives. Adeus, NickRewind.